Rebecca is a scientist who studies soil at the University of Arizona. Rebecca is interested in how soils change from the desert to the pine forests of the Santa Catalina Mountains in southern Arizona. Rebecca earned her PhD in the Department of Soil, Water, and Environmental Science, where she worked with the University of Arizona's Critical Zone Observatory, an interdisciplinary group of scientists conducting experiments that span from the canopies of plants to the groundwater. Rebecca has woken up early to start the drive out to her desert field site. She is planning to visit multiple field areas today and has a lot of work in front of her. Like many scientists, Rebecca enjoys her work outdoors and gains a better understanding of her research by spending time at her sites. Scientists travel all over the world to perform experiments and to collect the perfect samples. Scientists wake up at 3 a.m. to venture into the blistering dry lake beds of Death Valley to collect soils before summer temperatures breach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists traipse through dense, lush rainforests to study tropical soils. Scientists are helicoptered into the frigid depths of Antarctica to collect soils from the dry valleys. Soil scientists will hike, drive, fly, or even sail almost anywhere to conduct a valuable study, all in the pursuit of science. Today, Rebecca's adventure involves crossing streambeds, maneuvering around boulders, and climbing hill slopes to study and collect soils from the deserts and forests of southern Arizona. Rebecca is on her way to her first dryland research site situated in the Sonoran Desert. Dryland environments, which include arid deserts, are regions of the world known for low rainfall and water scarcity. Drylands encompass more than 40% of the land on Earth and are occupied by approximately 1/3 of the global population. Drylands are especially susceptible to climate change given the water-limited nature of the ecosystems, where water lost to evaporation is greater than precipitation for much of the year. Water-limited environments, such as Rebecca's field areas in the Sonoran Desert, have been the focus of much dryland research, from the plants through the soils down to the groundwater. The American West is expected to become drier and hotter as a result of climate change. In fact, climate model projections predict extremes in temperature and water scarcity across the southwestern U.S. For this reason, the western deserts are an incredibly important area to study, which is why Rebecca has focused her research there. The desert in Arizona is not the barren, desolate place that one may expect. Rebecca's first field site is located in the Sonoran Desert and receives an average of 17.5 inches or 45 centimeters of rain a year. Rebecca's site is located at an elevation of 3,600 feet or just under 1,100 meters. The average temperature is around 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius, which incorporates the coldest days of winter and the hottest days of summer. Even in such a dry, warm environment, the Sonoran Desert is full of life. There are plants, birds, insects, mammals, reptiles, and even a multitude of microorganisms in the soil. Soils are the living, breathing fabric separating the atmosphere from the Earth's crust. Human beings rely on soils for agriculture, food production, and as a natural filter that cleanses drinking water. Soils are critical for stabilizing the foundations of our homes, businesses, and schools. Soils are also the focus of much climate research worldwide, even in the deserts of the United States. Soil scientists, such as Rebecca, study how soils change across landscapes, under different types of plants, and in different climates. But why? When considering global climate change, one may think about oil, coal, and natural gas. These fossil fuels formed from the remains of prehistoric plants and animals that were buried under many layers of mud, sand, and rock. Those buried plants and animals were then transformed by heat and pressure over millions of years. Humans burn these fuels to power our cars and factories, which releases greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. Since these greenhouse gases can warm the Earth, scientists are interested in how carbon dioxide and other forms of carbon are stored and moved across the oceans, land, and atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is moved from the atmosphere to plants through photosynthesis. This is how plants convert sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into energy, or the food needed for plant growth. Carbon is the building block of life. A plant uses carbon-based energy to construct its cells and structure. And when the plant dies or is burned in a fire, the carbon building blocks remain, usually just in a different molecular form. Soils are a critical component to this global balance because as a whole, soils store 2 times as much carbon as live plants and 3 times as much carbon as the atmosphere. What about the soils at Rebecca's sites in Arizona? Where is the carbon in the soil? Can it be seen? Soil carbon is the decomposing leaves at the surface of the soil, the dead and decaying plant roots within the soil, and the charcoal remaining behind after a wildfire. Soil carbon can even bind to individual particles of soil that humans cannot see with just their eyes. All soils are unique. Each soil has its own colors, its own structure, and its own boundaries. Many soils form on top of geologic rock over thousands of years. As soils thicken, different soil layers are formed. These soil layers are called horizons. Soil scientists explore soil properties in the field and in the laboratory. Here, Rebecca investigates changes in how the soil looks, how the soil feels, and how the soil responds to different tests to identify the soil horizons, which she marks off with orange golf tees. Rebecca carefully records her observations and collects samples from each horizon to take back to the laboratory to analyze in more detail. What is the story of the desert soils? The desert soil has little to no plant material on the surface. There is also not a large number of roots in the soil. On a color scale from white to black, the desert soil is light or pale in color. Despite its beauty, the soils reveal that the desert soil does not contain a lot of carbon, which is a reflection of the dry, hot climate that the soils have formed in. The transition from the desert to mountain landscape is met with a unique mixture of desert grasslands and oak woodlands. Here, Rebecca's second field site, the elevation is 4,700 feet or 1,400 meters above sea level, where there is more rainfall and slightly cooler temperatures. Moving further up into the mountains, there is more rain, which leads to more plant growth and more leaves and roots in the soil. The desert grasslands and oak woodland soils are much different than the desert soils, even though there is only about 1,000 feet of elevation gain. What changes will occur in the soil? There are more dead leaves and plant material on top of the soil. The dead plant material breaks down and is incorporated into the soil over time, giving the soil a darker color, especially towards the surface. As Rebecca's investigation moves deeper into the soil becomes lighter, matching the properties of the parent rock below. What does this mean? The grassland and oak woodland surface soils are storing more carbon than the desert soils. Climate and plant type also appear to be important factors to consider. Rebecca's laboratory analyses confirmed that more soil carbon is stored in grassland and woodland areas with greater rainfall and slightly cooler temperatures compared to her other sites. In the southwest United States, there are mountain ranges called sky islands that rise above the deserts in the same way that oceanic islands rise from the sea. The sky islands are diverse, climate-controlled environments that link large expanses of desert to forested ecosystems across approximately 70,000 square miles of Arizona, New Mexico, and northern Mexico. The sky islands represent environmental gradients that span dramatic changes in precipitation and temperature over short distances, making the ecosystems ideal for examining how climate impacts soils, carbon, and plant type. The Santa Catalina Mountains are one of the largest and most commercially valued sky island ecosystems in the western United States, serving as a perfect field laboratory for the studies of soil and soil carbon across different climates, plant types, and landscapes. In fact, researchers have noted that the plant communities spanning the Santa Catalina Mountains are comparable to plants found from southern Arizona all the way up to southern Canada. Fire has been a dominant ecosystem-altering process on Earth for millions of years. A wildfire typically conjures up images of suffocating smoke, displaced wildlife, and hills of burning forest with glowing flames licking towards the sky. What one may not picture is the environment after the fire is contained and the billowing smoke cleared. What is left after a forest fire? Matchstick trees? Smoldering embers? Charred plant material? What about the soil? The third site of Rebecca's soil science study was disturbed by fire in the last decade. Rebecca's pine forest site averages a temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius and receives an average of 91 centimeters or 36 inches of rain and snow a year. The site receives twice as much precipitation as her desert site and lies at 7,300 feet or 2,200 meters above sea level. As Rebecca digs into the pine soil, one of the first things to notice is the persistence of the black charcoal in the soil surface. A dense mat of recent dead plant material mixed with charcoal becomes apparent as Rebecca continues to dig. Notice that this layer forms a distinct soil horizon that becomes more obvious as Rebecca finishes preparing the soil pit for study. At Rebecca's previous sites, the darker colors in the surface meant that a soil contained more carbon in the form of decomposing plant material. How does charcoal fit into this? Charcoal is another type of soil carbon. However, scientists have to be aware that decaying plant material and charcoal are two different types of soil carbon that can behave quite differently in the soil. Rebecca's research has focused on how long soil carbon remains in the soil over time. She has found that the dead plant material in the form of decaying leaves usually resides in the soil for decades before being broken down by microorganisms. However, charcoal can be more stable depending on the soil environment and can persist for hundreds or even thousands of years, especially if the charcoal is buried and preserved in the soil over time. The study of soil carbon is a fascinating, evolving field of study. How long will this charcoal-rich soil horizon persist in the soil? Will the fragments of charcoal be preserved through time, or will it break down? Will the same carbon persist in the soil for another scientist to explore 100 years from now? What will be discovered next? Thinking back to the global carbon cycle, carbon that persists this long in the environment is of great importance to researchers and to any human living on Earth. Scientists need to be aware of soil carbon that can persevere this long in the environment, especially as scientists and policymakers discuss possible strategies for regulating carbon storage and climate change on a global scale. Rebecca is headed out to her last field site in the middle of the forest. Why is Rebecca interested in studying soils in the forest? Because forests are priceless. Forests are important to humans for shelter, lumber, firewood, clean water, and medicine. Forests provide habitat for countless species from mammals to microorganisms. Forests and its associated soils filter and store water by removing pollutants, slowing the flow of rainwater, preventing flooding, and replenishing groundwater supplies. All of these things are required for human survival. Forests also store large amounts of carbon in the plants and soil, an important consideration for global carbon cycling. Understanding the effects that global climate change will have on forests is vital to maintaining human and ecosystem health across the world. Rebecca's fourth and last field site is located in the mixed conifer forest, which is the wettest and coolest site of Rebecca's study. The elevation at the mixed conifer site is 7,900 feet or 2,400 meters above sea level, which is more than double that of the lowest elevation desert site. The mixed conifer site receives an average of 95 centimeters or 37 inches of rain and snow a year, with an average temperature of 48 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees Celsius. The wet, cool mixed conifer environment is a mix of ideal conditions for productive plant growth and soil formation. When the properties of the mixed conifer soils are compared to the soil color, depth, and other properties measured at Rebecca's previous sites, the importance of the high elevation forest for soil carbon storage starts to emerge. Why? First, the mixed conifer soils are deeper than the soils at the other sites, reflecting a greater amount of soil being formed from the bedrock. Greater rainfall, cooler temperatures, and more plant material in the soil are likely contributing to this difference in soil depth. Rebecca's work has also shown that the mixed conifer soils contain more soil carbon, as suggested by the amount of dead plant material on the landscape surface, and the dark soil colors, especially in the surface soil. Based on soil samples collected from the site, Rebecca found that the mixed conifer soils store more carbon for longer periods of time than the lower elevation desert and pine soils. What does this mean? High elevation conifer forests are critical to long-term soil carbon storage. Unfortunately, the mixed conifer forests in water-limited areas such as the southwestern U.S. are especially vulnerable to drought and shifting climates. Climate scientists are predicting an upward elevation shift of desert ecosystems and a decrease in the area that supports high elevation forests. Shifting plant communities will likely change soil carbon storage mechanisms, and Rebecca is working to understand how these changes will play out in semi-arid environments. Climate-driven changes in soil carbon storage have the potential to shift the global carbon cycle. But how? Globally, how will soils adapt to climate change? Scientists such as Rebecca are still seeking answers to soil carbon storage and climate science research questions. Today, Rebecca ventured across her research sites to explore how soils and soil carbon change across the deserts and mountains of Arizona. Her research demonstrated why soil science is such a complex subject to study, since soils are influenced by many factors including fire, plants, rain, snow, and even the rock the soils form on. Soils have memory, a memory that records complex interactions among plants, geology, climate, and more. Soils hold clues about past civilizations. Soils are a critical component of climate change science and management practices. Soils provide human beings with filtered water, stable building foundations, clean air, and food. Soils are the foundation of life, a common yet underappreciated resource that must be cherished, protected, and preserved to ensure the survival of human beings and all other life forms on planet Earth.